The stage is set. The cowboys gather. The Earps steel themselves. And the dusty streets of Tombstone wait for the echo of gunfire. The gunfight is done, but vengeance isn't. The cowboys are wounded, not broken, and the streets of Tombstone will soon run red again. Welcome to a tale carved in dust, blood, and legend. This is not just the story of Wyatt Earp. It is the story of a town on the edge of chaos, of lawmen who stood their ground, of outlaws who lived by the gun, and of a desert where justice was written in lead. Across 30 chapters, you will ride into Tombstone's most dangerous days, the gunfight at the OK Corral, the bloody vendetta that followed, and the making of a man who became more than human, a myth that. Subscripts for more interesting stories. The Arizona desert stretched endless beneath a burning sun, its horizon shimmering with heat and dust. In the distance, nestled between the silver mines and red rock buttes, sat Tombstone, a raw frontier town where law was scarce and fortune drew both dreamers and killers. Saloons spilled whiskey onto the streets, card tables bred grudges, and the crack of pistols often settled disputes faster than the courts. It was into this cauldron that Wyatt Earp rode, his horse kicking up the powdery trail as he and his brothers sought both opportunity and peace. Wyatt was no stranger to gun smoke. He had drifted across Kansas cow towns as a lawman, earning a reputation for iron resolve and steady aim. Yet, here in Tombstone, he hoped for something more permanent: land, business, maybe even the promise of a quiet life with Josephine, the woman who stirred something deeper in his restless soul. But Tombstone was not a town that allowed quiet lives for long. That evening, as Wyatt dismounted before the Oriental Saloon, a pair of hard-eyed cowboys leaned against the hitching post, their hands resting close to their pistols. Their eyes followed him with open disdain. These were no miners or ranchers. They were cowboys, a loose band of rustlers and thieves who treated Tombstone as their hunting ground. Wyatt tipped his hat, his expression unreadable, and walked inside. But already, the desert winds whispered of coming violence. Inside the saloon, the light of oil lamps flickered across tables stacked with cards and silver dollars. Wyatt's brothers, Virgil and Morgan, sat waiting, their faces lined with trail dust but lit with the satisfaction of reunion. Virgil, the oldest, carried himself with the authority of a man long used to command. Morgan, younger and more jovial, masked a steel-hard edge with easy smiles. Together, the Earp brothers shared one truth: when trouble came, they would stand side by side. Over whiskey, they discussed their plans: investments, security, a chance to carve out a life in the restless frontier. But their talk soon turned to the power-gripping Tombstone. The cowboys, led by Ike Clanton and his kin, rode roughshod over the law. They rustled cattle, robbed stagecoaches, and bled miners for protection money. Their alliance stretched deep into the town's politics, giving them immunity to terrorize at will. As the brothers spoke, Doc Holliday entered, his presence unmistakable. Thin, pale, with eyes that smoldered like gun barrels after a duel, he carried the weight of illness but the fire of a gambler's spirit. "Gentlemen," he drawled, his Georgian accent laced with irony, "I hear this town's got a sickness worse than mine. Cowboys." His smirk faded as his hand tapped the butt of his revolver. "Question is, who's gonna cure it?" The following week, stagecoaches came under fire, passengers stripped of silver, drivers left bleeding in the dust. Witnesses whispered the names of Clanton and McClory men, but no jury dared convict them. Fear kept Tombstone silent. Wyatt rode the desert trails alone, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. He found the remnants of a stagecoach robbery: burned wheels, bloodied sand, and a deputy lying cold in the shade of a mesquite tree. Wyatt dismounted, kneeling by the body, jaw tightening with each passing second. This wasn't just lawlessness. It was open war. In the distance, a rider appeared, silhouetted against the fiery dusk. A wide-brimmed hat, a rifle slung low, and the swagger of a man unafraid of consequence. Wyatt's hand hovered over his Colt, but the rider merely raised a hand in mock salute before vanishing into the desert haze. The message was clear: the cowboys were watching him. The saloons became battlegrounds of words and whiskey. Ike Clanton, drunk and brash, shouted threats against the Earps, claiming that no lawman could touch him. "We own Tombstone," he roared, slamming his fist onto the bar. "Any Earp that stands in our way will be laid in Boot Hill." His men laughed, their spurs clinking as they spilled onto the street. Virgil, now wearing the badge of Tombstone's town marshal, responded with calm authority. He enforced ordinances against carrying weapons within city limits, a rule meant to tame the violence. The Cowboys spat at such laws, swaggering through town with six-shooters on their hips. Each arrest fanned the flames, each fine poured fuel on a fire ready to consume the town. At the Oriental Saloon, Wyatt and Doc played cards under the low hum of tension. Doc's eyes flicked to the door as Ike Clanton and Tom McClory entered, their boots heavy on the floorboards. "Well, Doc," Wyatt murmured, his hand resting on the table, "looks like trouble just walked in." The dawn air was thick with dust as Ike Clanton stumbled through the streets, drunk and shouting. He carried no gun. Virgil had confiscated it the night before, but his threats were louder than ever. "The Earps are finished," he bellowed. "We'll gun 'em down before sundown." Wyatt watched from the boardwalk, his jaw set like stone. The citizens of Tombstone gathered, murmuring in fear, knowing too well that words in this town often turned to bullets. Morgan appeared at Wyatt's side, his hand resting near his holster. "He's pushing for a fight, Wyatt. And he won't stop till he gets one." From the shadows of the livery stable, other cowboys gathered, Frank McClory, Tom McClory, and Billy Clanton, armed and ready. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across Fremont Street. The showdown Tombstone had dreaded was drawing near, each heartbeat bringing the clash closer. The morning sun cast Tombstone in gold, but no shine softened the steel in the eyes of its men. Virgil Earp, wearing the marshal's badge, strode down Fremont Street with Morgan and Wyatt at his side. Each step they took seemed to echo the growing divide between law and lawlessness. The cowboys clustered together, their spurs jangling like warning bells. Frank McClory leaned against a post, his revolver clearly visible despite the town's ordnance. Billy Clanton, young but already hardened by violence, smirked as if death was a joke waiting to be told. Doc Holliday, pale and coughing into a kerchief, fell in beside the Earps, his pistol hidden beneath his long coat. "This town's a powder keg," he rasped, "and Ike Clanton's just the fool to strike the match." As the four men marched, the townsfolk peered from behind curtains, whispering prayers. Tombstone had always lived on the edge of danger, but today the edge seemed razor-sharp. That night, Ike Clanton drank himself into a fury at the Alhambra Saloon. His voice carried through the smoky haze, dripping with venom. "I'll kill every last Earp before the week is out," he bellowed. His hand slammed onto the table, rattling glasses as his men laughed and jeered. But his laughter died when the batwing doors creaked open. Wyatt entered, his boots striking the wooden floor like drumbeats of doom. Silence swept the saloon. Even the piano stopped mid-note. Wyatt didn't speak at first. His cold stare did enough. "You talk too much, Ike," Wyatt said finally, his voice low and steady. "Careful. Men who boast that loud usually don't live long." He turned and left without another word, but the silence that followed was heavier than gun smoke. Ike slammed his glass, his pride stung. "He'll regret that," Ike snarled. "Mark my words, he'll regret it before sunrise." By dawn, word spread across Tombstone like wildfire. The cowboys had gathered again, heavily armed despite Virgil's ordnance. Rumors claimed they were waiting at the OK Corral, daring the Earps to confront them. Fear rippled through the town. Shopkeepers shuttered windows, mothers pulled children inside, and gamblers abandoned their cards mid-hand. Wyatt polished his Colt with deliberate care, every motion calm, every detail perfect. Morgan paced like a caged wolf, his nerves sparking with restless energy. Virgil spoke only once, adjusting the shotgun he carried. "No more warnings. No more chances. Today, we finish this." Doc Holliday emerged from the back, pale but grinning with deadly calm. He slipped a nickel-plated revolver into his belt and drawled, "Let's not keep them waiting, boys." The air outside was dry, the wind whispering through the desert brush. Tombstone's heartbeat quickened. Death was near, and everyone knew it. The four lawmen moved as one, their boots striking the dusty street in unison. Wyatt, Virgil, Morgan, and Doc, each step brought them closer to the most fateful moment of their lives. Citizens lined the boardwalks, holding their breath, watching history walk by. Doc's cough rattled, but he grinned through the pain. "This is a hell of a day to die," he muttered. Wyatt glanced at him, expression cold as stone. "We ain't the ones dying today." Ahead, the cowboys waited near the corral. Frank and Tom McClory, Billy Clanton, their revolvers glinting in the sun. Tension coiled like a rattlesnake about to strike. The space between the two groups shrank until only yards remained, the silence broken only by the creak of leather and the rattle of spurs. Virgil raised his hand, his voice steady. "Throw up your hands, I want your guns." The cowboys' hands twitched toward their holsters. The world exploded in thunder. Gunfire cracked like lightning, smoke swallowing the narrow lot. Wyatt's revolver barked twice, bullets tearing through the haze. Morgan fired alongside him, his shot striking true as Doc's pistol flashed with deadly precision. Billy Clanton cried out, firing wildly as bullets slammed into him. Frank McClory staggered, blood staining his shirt as he drew and fired in desperation. The chaos was deafening, screams, gunshots, the acrid stench of powder thick in the air. Virgil took a bullet to the leg, collapsing against the fence, yet still he fought, firing his shotgun into the smoke. Wyatt moved like a shadow, calm, relentless, his Colt never missing its mark. When the gunfire faded, silence claimed the corral. Bodies lay in the dust, smoke drifted skyward, and the legend of Tombstone was etched into history. But the cost of victory was far from over. The gunfight is done, but vengeance isn't. The cowboys are wounded, not broken, and the streets of Tombstone will soon run red again. The smoke lingered over the OK Corral like a funeral shroud. Frank McClory and Billy Clanton lay lifeless in the dirt, their revolvers still clutched in stiffening hands. Tom McClory, barely breathing, gasped his last under the eyes of horrified townsfolk. Tombstone had witnessed a spectacle of death, and its people would never forget it. Wyatt stood amidst the carnage, his face carved in stone. His brothers gathered near him, Morgan wiping blood from his brow, Virgil leaning heavily on his wounded leg, and Doc coughing up crimson as he forced a crooked grin. They had survived, but their enemies would not forgive. Whispers tore through the town like wildfire. Some hailed the Earps as heroes who faced down lawless killers. Others muttered that it had been cold-blooded murder in broad daylight. The line between justice and vengeance blurred with every retelling, and in the shadows, the cowboys sharpened their hate. That night, the Alhambra saloon filled with anger instead of laughter. Surviving cowboys slammed fists on tables, swearing vengeance for their fallen kin. Ike Clanton, his eyes wild and red from drink, swore Wyatt Earp's blood would stain Tombstone streets. Johnny Ringo, cold and calculating, offered no words of fury, only a chilling promise: "The Earps will pay. All of them." Back at the Earp household, silence reigned. Virgil's wound throbbed as Allie Earp tended to him, her hands trembling. Morgan kept watch by the window, scanning the streets, knowing the cowboys would not rest. Wyatt sat apart, his revolver resting on the table, polishing it with methodical care. His jaw clenched, his eyes unblinking. "Wyatt," Doc rasped from his chair, "you killed them today, but you didn't end them. They'll be back." Wyatt met his friend's gaze with an icy calm. "Then we'll be ready." By dawn, Tombstone's courthouse filled with murmurs. Sheriff Johnny Bean, ever at odds with the Earps, declared the brothers guilty of murder. The cowboys packed the benches, their faces twisted with vengeance, while Earp supporters gathered in tense silence. The trial would decide whether the lawmen were defenders of justice, or killers hiding behind badges. Wyatt testified with steel in his voice. He described the gunfight in clear, measured words, refusing to bend under Bean's accusations. Virgil, pale and weakened, told the same. Doc Holliday, coughing blood into a rag, smirked through his testimony, mocking the cowboys with every rasped reply. When the ruling came, the judge declared the Earps had acted within the law. They were free men. But the judgment did little to calm the storm. The cowboys' fury deepened, and Sheriff Bean's eyes burned with humiliation. The courtroom victory was hollow. Vengeance was still on the horizon. The revenge came sooner than anyone expected. Weeks after the trial, Virgil Earp limped home through the foggy streets. Lanterns flickered weakly in the night, casting long shadows across the boardwalk. Without warning, gunfire erupted from the dark. Bullets tore into him, striking his arm and shoulder, shattering bone and sending him crashing to the ground. The assassins vanished before help could arrive. Allie's screams echoed into the night as townsfolk rushed to the scene. Virgil survived, but his arm was ruined. He would never again wield a revolver with both hands. Wyatt stood at his brother's bedside, rage burning in his chest. He gripped Virgil's good hand and swore through clenched teeth, "They'll pay for this. Every last one of them." Doc Holliday leaned in the doorway, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Wyatt," he whispered, "this is only the beginning." The attack on Virgil was a spark thrown on dry tinder. Tombstone trembled with fear as rumors spread. The Cowboys had declared war. Shopkeepers shut early, travelers avoided the streets, and every shadow felt like a lurking threat. But Wyatt's heart was no longer bound by law, it was shackled to vengeance. He gathered Morgan and Doc in the dim light of Hatch's saloon, his voice low and deadly. "The law won't protect us. Sheriff Bean won't raise a hand. It's just us now. From here on, we write our own law." Morgan's eyes lit with grim resolve, while Doc's crooked grin masked the toll of illness. Together, they plotted their defense, but in their hearts, they knew it was more than defense, it was retribution. As Wyatt strapped his revolver across his hip, he whispered a vow that only Doc heard, "If they want blood, I'll give it to them." Virgil is broken, the Cowboys are emboldened, and Tombstone is teetering on the edge of chaos. But the true storm hasn't yet struck. The next bullet will rip Wyatt's world apart. The night was quiet, too quiet for Tombstone. Morgan Earp sat inside Hatch's saloon, laughing faintly with friends as a game of billiards clinked under the gaslight. The mood was lighter than usual, almost a breath of relief after weeks of watching shadows. But fate struck without warning. A bullet tore through the saloon window, shattering glass and silence alike. Morgan gasped, collapsing to the floor as crimson spread across his shirt. His eyes widened in shock, his breath ragged. The laughter turned to screams as chaos erupted. Wyatt burst through the doorway moments later, his heart hammering. He dropped to his knees beside his brother. Morgan's lips moved, whispering through blood, "Don't let them win." His hand fell limp. For Wyatt, the world went still. The Outlaws had gone too far. The law could no longer bind him. The funeral bells tolled heavy over Tombstone. Morgan's coffin was carried down Allen Street, the townsfolk watching with bowed heads, while the Cowboys watched with cold satisfaction. Wyatt walked behind the coffin, his face carved from granite, his hat brim shadowing eyes that burned with vengeance. At the graveside, the preacher's voice wavered, but Wyatt didn't hear the words. His thoughts were a storm, his soul a forge. When the last shovelful of dirt fell, Wyatt turned to Virgil, crippled but unbroken. "I swear to you, brother," Wyatt said, his voice steady as iron, "I'll hunt down every last one of them. Morgan will not rest until they do." Doc Holliday stepped forward, coughing into a bloody rag. He smiled grimly. "Well, Wyatt, if hell's where you're heading, you'll need company." The vendetta had begun. Wyatt wasted no time. By lantern light, he assembled his band in a back room of the Cosmopolitan Hotel. Doc Holliday leaned against the wall, pale but grinning like death himself. Sherman McMasters, a former cowboy turned ally, sat sharpening his revolver. Texas Jack Vermillion and Turkey Creek Jack Johnson rode in from the desert, answering Wyatt's call. Wyatt looked over them, his gaze hard. "This isn't about law. This isn't about badges. This is about blood. Those men think they can strike at my family and walk free. I aim to prove them wrong." Each man nodded in grim agreement. Doc spat into the fire and drawled, "Well, boys, we ain't no lawmen tonight. We're ghosts with guns." And so the vendetta riders were born, bound not by justice, but by vengeance. The desert wind howled as the riders left Tombstone, their silhouettes long and grim against the blood-red horizon. They rode hard, chasing whispers of the Cowboys' whereabouts. Tracks led them to a ranch outside town, where Frank Stillwell, a cowboy believed to be behind Morgan's murder, was spotted lurking by the rail yard. Wyatt dismounted silently, moving like a predator through the shadows. Stillwell never had a chance. The thunder of Wyatt's shotgun split the night, and the outlaw collapsed in the dust, his body riddled with lead. The message was clear. The vendetta had teeth. By dawn, word spread across the territory. Wyatt Earp was no longer a marshal, no longer a lawman. He was something far more dangerous, an avenger who would not stop until every enemy was dead or gone. The Cowboys panicked. They had thought the Earps broken, but now Wyatt hunted them like a wolf. Curly Bill Brocious, the most feared of the lot, gathered his men in a desert hideout, swearing that Wyatt would never take him alive. Meanwhile, Wyatt pressed on, tracking them across the harsh Arizona landscape. Each day, the sun scorched their backs. Each night, coyotes howled as if mocking their blood quest. The desert became a theater of vengeance, its dry wind carrying whispers of doom. When the riders reached Iron Springs, they found Curly Bill waiting with a dozen guns at his side. Wyatt dismounted, eyes locked on the outlaw leader. "This ends tonight," he growled. The cowboys raised their rifles. Wyatt raised his shotgun. The desert held its breath. And then, thunder. Wyatt charges headfirst into Curly Bill's ambush. Outnumbered, outgunned. Can even Wyatt Earp survive the desert showdown? The air split with gunfire. Bullets whistled past as Wyatt stood tall in the desert scrub, his shotgun blazing. Curly Bill's men scattered, but Wyatt didn't flinch. His first blast tore into Curly Bill himself, sending the outlaw spinning backward into the dust with a final scream. The cowboys fired furiously, but Wyatt seemed untouchable, moving through the smoke like a man possessed. His coat flared as he drew his revolver, each shot finding its mark. Doc Holliday, coughing blood, leaned from cover and added his fire, his grin wide and unhinged. When the dust cleared, the desert lay littered with bodies. Curly Bill Brocious, the scourge of Arizona, was dead by Wyatt's hand. The survivors fled into the wastelands, their fear greater than their hate. But Wyatt knew this wasn't the end. Curly Bill was gone, yet others still drew breath, and vengeance doesn't rest until the last shot is fired. By the time the Vendetta riders returned to camp, word of Curly Bill's death had already galloped ahead of them. In every saloon, in every dusty campfire gathering, men whispered Wyatt's name with awe and dread. He was no longer just a marshal or a gunman. He was a storm, a man who walked with death and always left his enemies cold in the dirt. But with glory came shadow. The territorial governor issued warrants, calling Wyatt and his men outlaws. The irony wasn't lost on him. The law he once served now branded him a criminal. Doc Holliday spat into the fire, shaking his head. "Law's just another word, Wyatt. What matters is the look in their eyes when they hear your name. That's power." Wyatt said nothing, but in his heart, he wondered if the price of power was the soul of a man. The cowboys who remained scattered into the desert, but Wyatt hunted them relentlessly. Across canyons and riverbeds, through rattlesnake country and sun-scorched plains, the riders followed blood and boot tracks. One by one, they found them. Each skirmish was swift and merciless. A cowboy cornered by a dry creek bed fell to Wyatt's revolver. Another, hiding in a canyon, was cut down by Doc's precise aim. The desert seemed endless, its silence broken only by gunfire and dying cries. The Vendetta ride left behind not just bodies, but a trail of fear. The cowboys were no longer hunters, they were prey. But for every outlaw that fell, Wyatt felt the weight of his brothers pressing heavier on his soul. Vengeance was filling the void of grief, but it was an endless well. And vengeance never gave back what it took. At dawn, the riders reached the Dragoon Mountains, where the last of the cowboys had holed up. The rocks and canyons were perfect for an ambush, and Wyatt knew it. Still, he pressed on. As the riders crossed a narrow pass, rifles cracked from the cliffs. Bullets sparked against stone, horses reared in panic. One of Wyatt's men was hit, falling hard to the dirt. The cowboys, desperate and cornered, poured fire down on them. Wyatt's voice cut through the chaos like thunder. "Hold your ground!" With fearless resolve, he led the charge up the rocky slope, his revolver spitting fire. Doc, pale as death, fought like a man already half in the grave, laughing bitterly as bullets sang past. By midday, the ambush was broken. The cowboys lay scattered and broken in the dust. Wyatt Earp stood tall at the peak, his revolver still smoking. The ride had claimed another victory, but at a terrible cost. The Vendetta ride slowed, its fury dimmed not by forgiveness but by exhaustion. The surviving cowboys had fled far beyond Wyatt's reach, slipping into Mexico and vanishing into the wild frontier. For the first time in weeks, the desert was quiet. But quiet did not mean peace. Around the campfire, the riders were shadows of themselves. McMasters stared into the flames, haunted by the faces of the dead. Texas Jack muttered prayers to keep the ghosts at bay. Doc Holliday's cough grew worse, blood staining his handkerchief with every spasm. Wyatt sat apart, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had avenged Morgan, struck down Curly Bill, and shattered the cowboy gang, but the emptiness remained. The desert had taken much, and given nothing back. As the wind whistled through the cactus, Wyatt whispered to himself, "I've killed my fill, but the ghosts will ride with me forever." The cowboys are broken, but Wyatt Earp is left with blood on his hands and a haunted soul. Ahead lies not just the end of a ride, but the birth of a legend. Tombstone's dusty streets no longer belonged to Wyatt Earp. Posters nailed to posts and saloon walls branded him and his riders as fugitives. The irony was bitter. The same law that once honored him now hunted him. Sheriff Bean, humiliated by Wyatt's defiance, fanned the flames, calling him a murderer no better than the men he hunted. Still, Wyatt rode on. He didn't care for laws written on paper. His law was carved in the dirt with bullets and blood. But deep inside, he knew the ride couldn't last forever. The cowboys were scattered, the vengeance nearly spent, and every dawn brought fresh riders chasing him, not his enemies. Around the fire one night, Doc coughed hard, spitting crimson into his rag. "Wyatt," he wheezed, "we've burned too bright. We'll burn out soon." Wyatt stared at the flames, saying nothing, but his silence spoke louder than words. The days grew heavier for Doc Holliday. His face was gaunt, his breath shallow, each ride more painful than the last. Yet when Wyatt spoke of ending the vendetta, Doc snapped with his old fire. "Don't you dare talk about stopping now. I'll see this through, even if it kills me." The riders watched him with quiet respect. For all his sickness, Doc was as fierce as any outlaw, his courage sharper than his pistols. In Wyatt's heart, though, fear gnawed, not for himself, but for the friend who had stood by him when no one else would. One night, under the cold stars, Doc leaned toward Wyatt. "When I go, don't mourn me, friend. Men like me, we weren't made for peace. But you still might find it, if you stop before it swallows you whole." Wyatt didn't answer. He couldn't. By spring, the cowboys were broken, their leaders dead or fled. The vendetta riders gathered one last time outside Tucson. Dust caked their clothes, their eyes hollow, their bodies weary from weeks of battle. Wyatt stood before them, his revolver at his side, his voice steady but heavy with finality. "It's done. The cowboys are finished. We've done what we set out to do." The men nodded, some in relief, others in sorrow. Doc lit a cigarette with trembling hands, coughing as he laughed. "So ends the bloodiest chapter Arizona's ever seen." One by one, the riders drifted off into the horizon, leaving Wyatt and Doc alone. The ride was over, but the cost would haunt them forever. The desert swallowed their trail, leaving behind only whispers of their vengeance. In Colorado, months later, Wyatt visited Doc in a small sanitarium. The once feared gunslinger lay frail in a bed, his breath shallow, his hands trembling. Yet his eyes still held that same mischievous fire. "Wyatt," Doc rasped, "do you believe in redemption?" Wyatt, stoic as ever, shook his head. "Men like us don't get redemption. Just survival." Doc chuckled weakly. "Then I guess I'm out of luck." Moments later, his laughter faded, and silence filled the room. Wyatt gripped his friend's hand until it went cold. Doc Holliday, gambler, killer, loyal friend, was gone. Wyatt walked out into the Colorado sun, the world quieter without the man who had stood beside him at the OK Corral. For the first time, Wyatt felt truly alone. Years later, Wyatt Earp drifted across the West, ranching, prospecting, dealing cards in smoky saloons. He never found lasting peace, but he carried the weight of Tombstone wherever he went. People whispered his name in every dusty town, each retelling bigger than the last. Some called him a hero of law and order. Others spat and called him a murderer. But all agreed on one thing: Wyatt Earp was a man who could not be broken. In his old age, long after the guns fell silent, Wyatt reflected on the desert, the dust, the blood. He had outlived most of his enemies, most of his friends, even the legends of his time. But his story, the story of Tombstone, of the OK Corral, of vengeance carved in lead, would never die. Wyatt Earp had become more than a man. He was a myth. And in the Wild West, myths never fade. The guns are silent, but the legend of Wyatt Earp still echoes across the canyons of the American West. Was he a hero, or just another outlaw with a badge?